it's a delight to welcome you to the first of our Mature Workers and Organisations seminar series as part of the Centre of Excellence in Population Ageing Research Program that I'm a CI, Chief Investigator in, along with my colleagues, some of whom are here today, including Professor Sharon Parker. So my name is Marion Baird and I'm at the University of Sydney. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge country. I'm talking to you from Sydney University, and that is on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging leaders, and any Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander people who may be joining us in our seminar today. And I ask you to acknowledge in your own way the different countries that you are on, because I know that we are talking to people from many countries around Australia, and we also have some guests from overseas. I'd also like to welcome Mark DeCure, who I can see is online with us. Mark is the Chair of the Board of Advice of the Centre of Excellence on Population Ageing Research. So it's wonderful to have you there too, Mark. We have a great series lined up for you, and to kick off our series, we invited Professor Phil Taylor from Federation University to speak to us about his most recent book, which really is in the area of the work we are doing. What is it that older women in Australia think and do when they're planning their retirement? Professor Taylor has 30 years of experience as a researcher, policy writer and advisor on workforce ageing, and is so suited to delivering this seminar today. He has published over 160 outputs, including books, journal articles, book chapters, reports and commentaries, including on individuals' orientations to work. He teaches in the areas of human resource management and industrial relations, and his major focus of research in the last decade, I suppose, Phil, has been mature workers. Phil has also served on a number of public committees, not just in Australia, but in the UK and elsewhere, and he's won major research grants from the Australian Research Council, SSHRC, the Canadian Council, and the ESRC of the UK. So Phil, as well as his background in human resource management and employment, Phil is also a fellow of the Gerontological Society of America and associate editor of the Journal of Aging and Society. And in 2018, he was the Australian Association of Gerontology Glenda Powell Travelling Fellow on the topic of work and ageing. And it's a great pleasure, therefore, Phil, to invite you to speak to us today. We are absolutely delighted to have you here, and we keep our fingers crossed that it will all work out. Given the slight interruption we've had in the beginning, I will return to our own research at the end of this presentation. I'd just like to say to everyone who's online with us, we will be taking questions later. And if you have any questions and you think about them, please type them into the chat function so we can follow those. And I will be doing the Q&A session at the end. So Phil, there's another picture of you. I'm going to hand over to you.
Well, thanks a lot, everyone, and thank you, Marion, for the very kind invitation. I was, as Marion was saying, I've been doing a lot of work in this over the last decade. I started working in this field in 1989. And have done lots of projects in this space over a number of years. And this is one of the more recent ones, the Retiring Women Project. We've published quite a lot via this project already, and we thought a while ago it would be a good idea to round things off with a book. So in fact, the data I'm going to be referring to today go back a few years now, but I still hope and I think they'll resonate. I'll go at a fair sprint through my slides because it'd be great to have a conversation with you all. So speaking with Alison and Marion, I thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about what older women say they want in terms of jobs, and how they've experienced looking for work, and also what they think about their work, because I think there are misconceptions out there about things like the extent of age discrimination in the labour market and so on. And I think this research may serve to put to bed some myths about older women and work. So let's carry on. So the background, I think we pretty much, I'm not going to dwell on this because I think we pretty much all know the background of population aging and public policy that is firmly levelled at prolonging working life, not just in Australia, but internationally, particularly amongst the developed nations. But I think what is interesting to consider is what an increasingly female aging workforce will mean. Arguably, women have different orientations to work and retirement to men. There is a need to consider women's skill needs, issues around caring responsibilities, and so on. And a number of years ago now, we applied for ARC funding to do a project called Retiring Women, which we thought addressed some of these concerns about this sort of gendered aging workforce. The project was multifaceted and involved surveying older women. We surveyed women from 2 superannuation funds. We undertook a large number of follow-up interviews. We interviewed a range of key informants, including human resource managers as well. So we collected a vast range of data, and we've been working our way through those data for the last several years now. So this particular, so I'm just going to try and move the screen out of the way a little bit so I can see a little bit better. So this particular the presentation I'm going to be giving today draws from a postal survey carried out in 2013-14 of 2,467 women aged between 50 and 70. We asked a range of questions about, not just about retirement, and that was the critical thing. We were actually very interested in women's labour force engagement. The vast majority of them were working. A significant proportion were retired or not seeking work, and then a rather smaller proportion, somewhat disappointingly for me, because I really was very interested in this group. We also interviewed some job seekers. As I said, the respondents, the women respondents, came from 2 superannuation funds. It's important to stress at this point, and we make that point in the book, that on the whole, the women we surveyed tended to be better educated, somewhat more financially secure, and socially privileged. But that doesn't. There were women in the sample not like that too. The majority of women came from the education and training sector, and we had a response rate of around 20%. So let's get into some of the findings. Oops. So what we found was that the majority of the women, the employed women in our survey, reported high job satisfaction. They also reported, on the whole, maintaining a good quality of work-life balance. But around a quarter had foregone development opportunities, and also declined extra projects due to responsibilities outside of work. But a very small minority had missed out on promotions, and outside activities meant that only a very small number of women were leaving work entirely. So the message for us was that the vast majority of the women, the employed women we surveyed, were actually able to maintain a good work-life balance. We also asked questions about working hours preferences, how going on for this notion of maintenance of work-life balance. And we asked women whether they would prefer fewer working hours, more working hours, or for their working hours to stay the same. And as you can see from this slide, around half preferred fewer working hours, but over 2/5 were very happy with their working hours as they are, and only around 5% wanted more working hours. Now, this fewer working hours, however, there's often an idea out there that older workers want greater flexibility, and I'm not so sure, based on our data, what all of this means. We didn't see evidence in a lot of cases of this desire for fewer working hours representing a winding down at the end of career. For many of the women in our survey, it appeared to mean achieving what they considered to be a comfortable workload and something that was actually more like their contracted hours. So that might be a conversation that we could pick up if we have time later on today, what this thing about flexible working actually means. What's the reality of that for older women? Age discrimination is a long-standing topic of interest in Australia, as it is elsewhere, and we recently had the WHO release a report on this. We asked a number of questions that got at issues of age discrimination. And the general message coming out of our research is that on the whole, in work, we didn't find much evidence of age discrimination. Where age discrimination tended to manifest was in terms of job seeking. So you can see here, we asked questions of the respondents around their experiences of working with managers and co-workers. And we asked them to indicate whether any of these things on the left here in blue had happened to them. And as you can see, the women in the survey were more likely to report experiencing that they were valued for their skills, they were appreciated for their experience, and their work performance was evaluated fairly, than, for instance, stated that they'd experienced derogatory comments about their appearance, made to feel like they didn't fit in, and experienced inappropriate comments about their appearance. So it sort of suggests to us that amongst managers, there were fewer experiences of age discrimination than one might imagine there would be from some of the literature. And similarly, in terms of experiences with co-workers, again, the women we surveyed reported experiencing feeling valued for their skills, appreciated for their experience, and feeling a valued part of the work community, than, as you can see at the top there, experience things like derogatory comments or inappropriate comments, insulting jokes made about their gender, insulting jokes made about their age, and so on. So I think this is quite an interesting finding, and something that we can perhaps come back to later on the presentation. And this particular figure here breaks things down for different kinds of co-worker and managers. So you can see their younger female co-worker at the top, and we organize the data in terms of fair treatment or unfair treatment. And you can see that on the whole, our respondents were more likely to report fair treatment than unfair treatment, which I think is quite important in the Australian context. And I think for me, perhaps tells us about the need to think more about how we advocate for older workers. For the next part of my presentation, I just want to move on to this. So we talked about experiences of working life, those people in employment, but we also surveyed people who had been job seekers in the last few years prior to the survey, and we had about 525 respondents in that category. And I just wanted to say a little bit about a range of factors here. First of all, barriers to starting new employment. We asked our respondents a lot of questions about barriers that they might have faced, and we cut the data different ways. And in this figure, you can see that we cut the data by age. So going back to that point I made a few moments ago around age discrimination, you can see there that a significant proportion of the respondents did report that they were considered too old by employers. But there are lots of other barriers that our respondents identified. Critically, a lack of jobs in their line of work, and too many applications, so labour market factors, feeling that they were overqualified, and so on. But you can see other things further down that list there that were considered by our respondents to be rather less important. For instance, a lack of work or a lack of work experience, ill health, disability or injury, and down the bottom there, language or ethnic differences, to name but a few. Oops, forgive me. Oops. So just to summarize some of the findings around barriers, the oldest workers in the sample were more likely to perceive discrimination by employers than younger workers. And those in the 50-54 age range were more likely to identify a lack of support with job search. And those workers were also more likely to identify a lack of education and experience as barriers. So differences there between younger, older workers and older workers. So caring responsibilities were more likely to be identified as a barrier by the youngest and the oldest. And also for those in the 50-54 age range, a problem we thought with family responsibilities may have been linked to a barrier with suitable working hours identified by a proportion. So there's some evidence on perceptions of barriers, age discrimination there, yes, but a range of other critical factors. We also, as well as barriers, we also asked about factors that were supporting new employment. And again, we cut the data various ways, including here by age. So you can see there for the oldest age group at the top there, I was said they were significantly more likely to report that I was given the option of flexible working hours, and just scanning this, another one, creating a niche position for my skills. Lots of, I think, really interesting findings concerning what was supporting these women to find new jobs. And you can see there down the bottom things like returning to work support after child rearing, which I think I thought that might come rather higher in the list than it did. And also you can see their return to work support for mature workers, very little there. To summarize that figure, and I think really interestingly, those aged 65 to 69 benefited most from flexible hours. fewer hours and job autonomy, but not more challenging work, and finding a niche position and having the opportunity to work from home, interesting in finding in current times. Manager and supervisor support was also important, and peer support was also important. For those aged 60 to 64, a reduction in terms of level of responsibility was effective for them. And I think also notably, except for those aged 60 to 65 to 69, a shift to more challenging work had appealed to a significant minority of women. And I think this is this is a critical finding for me. And again, it sort of, I think, stands in contrast to the notion that older workers are winding down. We often have this, or we're often given the perception that older workers are in the process of winding down to retirement. And our study, I think, stands in stark contrast to this. We saw many of the women in our survey actually seeking more challenging opportunities and growth, which perhaps is not a surprise, but I think it does stand in contrast to a lot of the received wisdom about what older workers want. And we also, and just beginning to draw a close now, we also asked our respondents about why they'd started new employment, and you can see we asked them a range of questions about this, and I'll summarize it in a moment. But you can see there for the oldest older workers, things like exciting possibilities came up that I couldn't resist. Similarly, for that group, I felt I still had the energy to work to my fullest potential. And then further down the list, my previous employer asked me to come back to work. Again, I think standing in contrast to some of the received wisdom around this issue. So were commonly told, for instance, that one of the factors that encourages older people to return to work is social isolation and loneliness and so on. And you can see that as a factor came rather further down the list. I wanted more social contact, and also even further down than that, I was lonely. For the oldest age group in our sample, key drivers were linked to opportunity, fulfillment, and the attraction of returning to a previous workplace. So this is about, this for me speaks to issues of growth, not of winding down. For those aged 50 to 59, change of career, job loss, and needing another job and seeking promotion were more important. Financial considerations were understandably also a significant factor for many, and also a fresh challenge and new opportunities being factors. So as I've already said, across the age groups, factors such as family pressure to return to work, loneliness, or a wish for more social contact, the ending of caring responsibilities, ceasing educational training, divorce, and so on, were only identified by a relatively small minority of respondents. So I think there's a whole lot of interesting findings in here to consider. So just some concluding remarks from me. According to our data, women's working lives were not characterised by experiences of ageism and age discrimination on the whole. That is not to say in our survey we did not uncover evidence of it, because we most certainly did. And sort of if you look in the book, that's borne out in a number of our qualitative interviews, where discriminatory experiences clearly had driven a number of women out of the workplace. But I don't think that characterized women's experiences as a whole, those in work at any rate. Discrimination manifesting in various forms was a barrier to those seeking work, but not the only barrier. So for job seekers, yes, age discrimination was a factor, but there were other factors at work, for instance, issues of health and issues of sort of labour market issues. I think for me and for my co-authors, our findings critically point to the heterogeneity of older women workers and the need to consider this in devising management strategies and public policy measures. It's an obvious thing, I think, probably for most of us present today, but we tend to throw terms like older workers around as if they're meaningful. And I think our research indicates that we need to be very cautious about devising policies and workplace strategies for older women workers, because what is an older worker? And I think that I think our findings demonstrate that it's a very problematical to develop policy in this area. And then finally for me, and I've said this already, our findings, I think, contrast with common stereotypes of older workers as winding down to retirement. And instead, I think, pointing to the need for the ability of managers to devise challenging job opportunities and so on, as encouraging women's continued labour force engagement.